Just a few words about our work as a consulate, right? Because you probably are not so aware of the wheelings and dealings of the diplomatic circus, so to say. Our consulate, the Austrian consulate in Los Angeles opened in 1969, so we are celebrating its 50th birthday next year. And we have, it was opened, among other things, because of the extremely close relations between Vienna and Austria and Hollywood and the film sector, right? As you maybe know, probably without mainly Jewish immigrants from Vienna, the golden age of Hollywood would not have existed in this form and in this quality, right? So from the silent movies, the first movies of Charlie Chaplin, the director was from Vienna, to Sternberg, to Stroheim, these pioneers, to Billy Wilder, Zinnemann, Fritz Lang, you know, and then all the film composers really invented the film music, like Concord or Max Steiner. They all came from Vienna or from the former Austrian monarchy. So there's a big relations into the present. If you think also of Arnold Schwarzenegger, the bodybuilder turning actor, turning politician, who is also very much closely working with the Austrian government in the framework of the Austrian World Summit, which is a long-term initiative to help governments reach their sustainable development goals. Governments around the world, and so that the government is very active, and as you know, he's very passionate about green technologies and sustainability. So we have these close relations with LA, but I'm also happy that, you know, since 1.5 years we have a special outlet here in San Francisco dealing with technological questions and the context to Silicon Valley, which is, I think, extremely important, you know, and Martin will tell you later about these connections and all the challenges we have in Austria and how we try to cooperate in this field, you know, to tackle these challenges and get more feeling about what we can do about the future, right? But let me just briefly say about Austria. You mentioned the political situation. Certainly will not avoid this discussion, but let me, because you're a very educated and international crowd, but usually, you know, many people don't know that much about Austria, right? This is the Institute for European Studies. It's certainly different, but still you have to say that it's not so well known, and it's kind of interesting to say that traditional in America, the image of Austria is very much informed by a movie, right? Sound of Music. It's true. So the funny thing is that in Austria, hardly anybody has ever seen this film. So, but it certainly is interesting how much it is informed, you know, this image of Austria. But the thing is, to my taste, personal taste, I think this is videotaped. I personally find the film a little bit schmaltzy. But I have to say that the underlying story of the Trump family is really something really great. We're talking about this Captain von Trapp, who was a high-ranking officer in the Imperial Army. Empire broke down in the year 1918, as you know. So when the Nazis arrived in Austria, they wanted him to have him, you know, in their army, and he said, I won't work for the Germans, I won't work for the Nazis. And he had a castle, this castle in Salzburg. He had a lot of kids, I don't know how many, 8. And so he left Austria overnight and through the Austrian-Italian border and left the country. I think it's incredible, you know, of civic courage. It's really, so von Trapp is really a model of civic courage. And I would have, you know, it would have been beautiful to have many more of these von Trapps in Austria at this time. I happen to have a common friend brought us together with his son, his oldest son. I met him in Vienna, and over coffee I said, you know, how proud we are of his family. And it was really a wonderful relation we have built up at that time. So, but a part of that, you know, Austria. It's in terms of population size, as you know, it's not big, right? I mean, we're talking about a population of 9 million, so it's like Los Angeles County in this size. But then you have to say on the other side, what the beauty of Europe is that there are also quite a number of smaller countries which are doing really great and which are really punching above their weight. Look at the Scandinavians, you know, this Berkeley, a center of innovation, right? You know better than me how strong they are, right? Or in social policies, or look at Switzerland and many, many other countries. And I think Austria is kind of one of these countries which is really punching above its weight. Usually, Austria is mostly known to many here also in the United States, mainly as a tourist destination, right? You go there for the beautiful landscape, for skiing, for the beautiful cities, for the amazing cultural festivals we have. But if we just discussed it when we came here, you know, in terms of economic image, you know, if you're honest, it's not really so present, and that's quite interesting because the Austrian economy is quite extremely competitive and very innovative, and it's also kind of a champion in exports. We have basically 60% of our national product goes into export. We have also a huge trade surplus with the United States, about for our size, right? It's like $4 billion, right? But that's something. So it's quite a strong economy, and there are probably two reasons for that, because why this kind of economic image is a little bit missing. And the first reason is probably a little bit a self-inflicted wound, right? Because over many decades, Austria has mainly nourished its image as a cultural, as a tourist destination, as a cultural hotspot. And this served Austria quite well. You know, the tourism in Austria is phenomenal. It's really also economically very important in the sense that you have 145 million overnight stays per year in Austria, 43 million tourists per year. So this is for a small country, this is quite a lot, and it's an important economic factor. But this being said, so apart from basically tourism, there's not so much well. It's also because of this kind of this nourishment of this little bit, if I may say so, sugar-coated image of Austria, which served the country well. But on the other hand, it also kind of blocked the view on major other aspects of Austria, right? And the second reason why I see this lack of an image there is that of course we have a number of big companies. Some of them you might know, like Red Bull, right? But it's basically nobody knows that it's an Austrian company, right? Although it's a serious competitor for Coca-Cola, right? But consumer products, Swarovski and all this. But basically, it's kind of the backbone of the Austrian economy are small and medium-sized enterprises, right? And there are many of them are kind of quite hundreds of them are kind of leaders in their, even world leaders in niches, in very lucrative niches, but which are not so present in the sense because it's more a kind of a supplier industry, right? If you look at, you know, the sensors in the iPhone come from Austria, or the new now the first real competition for Tesla starts production now in Austria on behalf of Land Rover. They produce a very innovative electric car in Styria in Austria. You have companies focusing on skyscraper technologies, like the tallest tower in the world. There were 5 Austrian companies involved in Dubai, right, the Burj Khalifa, etc. So you have many of these quite interesting companies, which are not so basically in the presence, in the international presence, but who are really a tremendous work. I would say the second feature of of Austria economically, and then I start with economics, is this hub function between East and West, right? This is certainly Eastern and Western Europe. This is owed, of course, to our geographic position at the very heart of Europe, right? So Vienna, for instance, you saw it set of Europe. I hope there are no Belgian colleagues here, but that would be a wonderful capital for Europe also. But it's also, of course, owed to our history as the heartland of the Habsburg Empire, right? So the Habsburgs were quite all over the world in this long history of this dynasty. But basically, their core land was a vast Central European empire. And we are really historic, we are culturally, economically, etc., very close to this whole region. And so, you know, the Austrian expertise is very much appreciated by international investors who hundreds of them have moved their regional headquarters to Austria, you know, to work on these Central and Eastern European markets. This brings me, talking about hub functions, this brings me to our capital city, Vienna, talking about hubs. Vienna, as probably all major capitals, are a little bit a universe for themselves, right? You say Paris is not France, and London is not England, etc. And this is also holds particularly true for Vienna, which is really a special city. Of course, we have this imperial splendor. You know, it has been at the headquarters of the Habsburg Empire for nearly 500 years, right? So if you compare it even to Washington, right, it's still 250 years to go, you know, to beat that record. So this is quite a heritage. Of course, you have a great cultural life in Vienna. You know, it's kind of a theater-crazy city, 70,000 theater seats. It's really so also the culture is really also quite an economic factor. It certainly, as you all know, it's a diplomatic hub, right? We have around 30 international organizations in Vienna, so it's one of the most important, you know, not as important as New York, but not as important as Brussels, but it's one of the, you know, biggest diplomatic hubs in the world. We have the IEA, which I've been working on also, as you know, is dealing with the Iran dossier, for instance, and many other issues, very important organization. We have the OPEC and many others. But what I find most outstanding about Vienna is it's also its political model, right? I mean, the most interesting thing about Vienna is that it's since the breakdown of the monarchy exactly 100 years ago, there has been basically one constant policy, you know, and everything, you know, in this policy is focusing, you know, on making, not on shining internationally so much, but just to create a city which is worth living for everybody. And this is something which should go without saying, you know, natural preoccupation for all politicians, right? But I still think that it's very special in Vienna, what has been done since, you know, in terms of public housing, you know, in terms of the social security networks, in terms of public health, in terms of education. You know, Vienna is a city where you don't even pay for kindergarten. So in Austria, and this is also very important, the political subject, education is basically nearly free, right? I mean, you can go, you know, even to the universities are free or have a very limited kind of, not worth mentioning fees to study. So if it comes to this focus on the public good, which is so important, I think Vienna is really a very interesting and convincing model to look at in terms of social justice, etc. And the interesting thing is also that because some argue that it's not reconciled, you know, you can't reconcile it with kind of economic growth if you put, you know, invest too much in the social infrastructure, etc. So many international rankings show that Vienna is on the top. It was even by UN Habitat, it was elected as the most prosperous city on earth. It's leading in all international rankings in terms of livability and all that. So it's really a showcase how you can reconcile and combine social justice and economic prosperity. And in that sense, I think it's really an interesting model also to look at. Now I would like to talk about politics, of course, and I would like to start with Europe, right? Austria is a member of the European Union since 1995. And just to be very clear, because the European Union seems to be a little bit in a crisis, right? And there's a lot of negative talk about the EU. But let me be very clear. I think that the European Union is the most amazing peace project in the history of this earth, without any doubt. That this kind of 50 years of European immigration and the resulting peace and prosperity borders on the miraculous. Austria, as a former superpower, was, for the quite 500 years quite involved in every war which was waging in Europe. And I think that, that we now live together in peace and prosperity is really a great achievement. If you, as you all know, you all know the history of Europe quite well. It's really a great achievement. And this is also why Austria and also the Austrian government is very pro-European. We think it's a very important project. But having said that, of course, we need to say that there are dark clouds have been looming over Europe in the last couple of years. When I joined the diplomatic service in 1996, we just joined the European Union 1 year before. Everything was always complex, always a lot of struggle and negotiations and so on. A lot of setbacks also, but basically there was a very optimistic atmosphere, right? Because everybody wanted to join the European Union. We had just joined together with Sweden and Finland, and all the Eastern European countries who left the orbit of the Soviet Union. They were eager to join. Then we introduced the common currency in 2002, right? We abolished the border controls, so basically Austria is a country without borders nowadays, right? We don't have internal border controls anymore in the so-called Schengen area. So it was basically always an upward movement, and just the European Union was just all over Europe, in the Balkans, in Eastern Europe, even in the Caucasus, this was just the best game in town, so to say. But then, of course, one thing after the other happened, right? So we had first the world financial crisis, which hit Eastern Europe, which was just on the verge of kind of developing in a positive direction economically and booming. It hit Eastern Europe particularly hard, which was also bad for Austria because we are heavily invested in that region, right? Then there came the debt crisis, like in Greece and other southern European countries. We had the rising unemployment, particularly youth unemployment, right? Like crazy unemployment rates in some countries in the youth sector, which are really very troubling. And of course, then came the terrorist attacks, right, in many European cities and countries. And last but not least, the refugee crisis, which was also a kind of very traumatizing event in 2015 and 16, where basically millions of refugees, but also immigrants from Africa and from the Horn of Africa and from the Middle East came to Europe, and and also really steamrolled the border controls. So it was kind of so that there are quite a lot of challenges, and this all was accompanied by also great, kind of Euro-skepticism and anti-European resentment in many European countries. This was culminating, as you know, in the Brexit, right? which was really a heavy blow to the European Union, and this decision of the Brits to leave was certainly very much linked also to immigration from within the EU. I'm very convinced that this was really a major element of this decision to leave the European Union. Right? But having said that, and despite of all these dark clouds that have been hanging above us in the last couple of years, I'm quite convinced that there's really reason. There's not only a silver lining, but there's really reason for optimism here. But the first thing is that fortunately the economy is booming again in Europe. It's really much better than it means for employment rates, etc., and for the general mood in the population. And then I also think that we have also now the right set of political leaders who can bring the European Union back on track. Because there are a lot of challenges, but I believe that we have them. There's of course Emmanuel Macron, for instance, in France. There's of course Merkel in Germany. But I'm also happy to say that our new Prime Minister, who is the youngest Prime Minister in any democratic country, he's 31, I believe, right? Is one of those very kind of capable politicians who together can bring Europe back on track, right? Because we will take over the presidency of the European Union in July, so we will have a special responsibility. There are a lot of challenges during our presidency. We have to deal with Brexit. To how do we go on and how we do proceed with UK's exit from Europe. How do we reorganize our institutions? You know much better than I do, right? What all these challenges are. And we have also to discuss, in which direction Europe should go, right? Because maybe the European Union, as it was perceived by the population, was that it's a little bit out of touch with the concerns of the population, right? For instance, in terms of security policy, it's not any fault of any political institution like the Commission, or it's just that what we need to discuss is just on which kind of areas the Europe should jointly focus on, right? And this is, I think, a very interesting discussion, and I think it will be really also exciting times for the European Union, because, as you say, never let the crisis be wasted, and we are certainly in a certain way in a crisis. But now to discuss, how to go down, how to go on, which priorities we should set for our common agenda in Europe is certainly a very interesting discussion. And there are certainly very different kinds of point of view, like the Austrian point of view is slightly different, certainly in certain aspects, and the French point of view, they want to go ahead with the economic union, have an own budget for the Euro countries, etc. So, but I think we have now this set of leadership which is really interested in bringing Europe ahead. And I'm really expecting a fruitful discussion on all these important issues. This, last but not least, brings me to the domestic political situation in Austria. Austria, we had in the last couple of years, basically 3 elections which have raised a lot of international attention. Internationally, it's a small country, but still there's nearly always quite an attention on what's going on in Austria, because it's also regarded a little bit in Europe as a mood barometer of what's going on. And certain tendencies of developments which then, show themselves also in other countries. So it started in 2015 with municipal elections in Vienna, which is a kind of very special case, because Vienna is basically regarded internationally as a stronghold of the liberals, right, of left-wing parties. And there was also basically an election which was little bit stylized as a fight between the Social Democrats and the Freedom Party, which is, as you know, one of the most successful anti-establishment parties, which was clearly won by the Social Democrats. Who formed a coalition with the Green Party, so we have a center-left coalition in Vienna. Then we had the presidential elections in 2016, right? Which was also a very interesting situation, but because for the first time in the Second Republic, neither the conservatives, so the Christian Christian Democrats, nor the Social Democrats made it into the second round, which was really unheard of. Their candidates were kicked out in the first round of this election. And so there was the former leader of the Green Party, basically both, outsiders, you have to say, of the Green Party and the candidate of the Freedom Party, which found themselves in a probably unexpected situation of being in the last round of this election. And this election was won by the candidate of the Green Party. He is a professor, economics professor, intellectual, liberal professor, who is our new president. And then we had a third election, which is the general election you were referring to, which took place last October. So the winner of this election is our former boss and foreign minister, Sebastian Kurz. He's a very kind of charismatic personality, a very gifted politician, and he won this election against the Social Democrats, and he formed a coalition with the Freedom Party. They have, of course, this has in some international media, also here in the United States, it has, how do you call it, raised some eyebrows, right? But you need to say that in this present situation Austria was in, there was basically already clear before this election that there is no alternative to this kind of form of coalition, because we had for many, many years, and it was also the predominant form of coalition since since the end of World War II, a coalition of the conservatives and the Social Democrats. And it was, towards the end, it was a little bit like in Congress, if you know what I mean, right, between Republicans and Democrats. So it was really an atmosphere where many were good-willing, but at the end of the day, it was clear for everybody that it couldn't go on like that, and just change was necessary in a way. So they formed this coalition, and I have to say that also the Freedom Party has certainly moved to the center. It was very EU-skeptical, they certainly won also a couple of elections on this ticket, but they really moved to the center also in the way that the government program is extremely pro-EU, and so I think we can rightfully talk about a center-right government, which is also, since they agree on many issues, which is also capable of tackling all the issues and the challenges that our society stands in front of, right? So I would like to stop here. I'm sorry that I've talked too long, but this is a kind of a diplomatic kind of illness, right, that we are talking too long. But talking about challenges, I would like to give the floor to Martin.
Thank you, Andreas, and I just want to make one personal remark. As mentioned, we both worked in New York also together, and now we're here on the West Coast. And I think part of the job of an Austrian diplomat in the United States, and there's a specific type of Austrian diplomat that is attracted to work in the United States, is also to explain America to Austrians. And particularly when you are here in a place like the Bay Area, the really biggest and most important innovation area where so many of the changes that are already affecting our societies are coming from. You can imagine that how much of my time I'm spending to explain Silicon Valley, explain the new technologies to Austrians who come here from companies, startups, to politicians, and want to learn and want to sometimes see how they can replicate it, which is of course an illusion, but see also how to learn from it. And that is also something, and one of the reasons I'm going to talk about that in a moment, why our specific model and our specific mission was created about 1.5 years ago with OpenAustria, a new initiative by the Austrian Foreign Ministry and the Austrian Chamber of Trade in October 2016. I liked a lot the term you used about the mood barometer of the Austrian election, kind of a barometer of the moods on a larger scale. I wouldn't go so far as Karl Kraus, who famously called Vienna the Versuchsstation des Weltuntergangs, the laboratory of the apocalypse. But it is true that whenever something happens in Austria, people give it a closer look. And Andreas talked a lot about the underlying issues in the last elections, and I would like to focus also in somehow relating it to my work here for OpenAustria with another topic that often goes unnoticed, and it has to do with the economic challenges a country like Austria, and it's not alone with these challenges, is facing, and they might have also to do with some of the tensions we're experiencing in Austria, in Europe, and even in this country. So what I'm trying to say is maybe there is a connection with the things that are going on in Silicon Valley, which on the one hand are cause for optimism, extreme hope in what this technology can achieve, but they're at the same time also the cause of anxieties and fears, and that might also even when you break it down to political processes, political debates, explain some of the tensions that are undergoing. If you look at Austria, Andreas mentioned many positive things that can be said about Austria. The standard of living in Vienna, 8 times in a row, #1 in the world in terms of standard of living. Austria itself, #3 in the latest standard of living polls. And that's due to a lot of things. It's our immense cultural heritage. The environment is by and large clean and healthy. There's working and functioning healthcare system. The public infrastructure is good. We actually have a fantastic public transportation. There's political and social stability. There's a low crime rate. There's low unemployment. There's a highly qualified workforce. So on a lot of fronts, over the last decades, Austria has been performing well. It has to do with, of course, the post-war economic miracle up to the 1990s, after the end of the Cold War, which put Austria back in a geostrategical center position in Europe, and Austria in the 90s took really excellent advantage of this new position by expanding its economy into Central and Eastern Europe. Many countries up until now, it's even before the Germans, #1 foreign investor in many of Central and Eastern European countries. So this went really, really well. And it gave this kind of feeling of Austrians, and I'm quoting another famous person in the 1970s, the Pope, who called Austria famously the island of the blessed. In some ways, Austria was also very lucky, escaped communism, other than its Central and Eastern European neighbors. And a lot of these factors contributed to the second half of the 20th century as a very kind of cozy and comfortable and prosperous narrative for Austrians. And now I want to come back again to recent history and the situation of our economy. And of course, what happened in 2007 was the global economic crisis, and how did Austria do in that? And I will just give you one statistical number. In 2011, in the global competitiveness ranking of the IMD, which is a Swiss institute, Austria was number 11 in global competitiveness, and in 2017, it had slowly, year by year, decreased in the ranking. Is now at number 25. And still, the numbers are okay, but it is still, there is, these feelings that in the international rankings, Austria was kind of slowly losing its very top position due to not any particularly dramatic effects, but maybe, and that is also the impression that was among Austrian citizens, but also among Austrian entrepreneurs, a kind of a political deadlock. Andreas mentioned it before. There was just recently in 2017, around the time of the election, the Austrian Chamber of Trade made a survey among Austrian entrepreneurs about their economic outlook, what they were feeling, and they were actually largely optimistic because the economy was picking up, the global economy was picking up, but they were totally not optimistic about the political situation and about the bureaucracy, kind of understanding the economic challenges that Austria is facing. So the rankings kind of were so-so, and I think this was something, and this was something that the political class in Austria was actually realizing, and I think they were realizing it in all parties. I would just give you a few indications. The Social Democratic Party had elected a new leader, Mr. Kern, who is now the opposition leader, who presented Plan A just a year ago, when it was already kind of clear that the country was heading towards new elections, which was a plan also largely on economic reform. There was a new party that entered the political stage in Austria, the NEOS, probably a name that would mean different things here in the United States, but in Austria it means a mixture, it stands for a mixture of social liberalism, but even much stronger economic reform. And it's one of those parties that did actually very well in the past elections. And then of course Mr. Kurz himself, who also campaigned on a platform of economic reform, and this is also the reason why OpenAustria was founded. He personally came in 2015 to Silicon Valley with Austrian entrepreneurs, met successful Austrians here in Stanford, Berkeley, in the tech industry, and announced there, which is unusual because usually in foreign ministry we think in centuries, and he announced there, right in there, we need to do something, we're going to open an official Austrian representation here. And within a few months there was a plan was done, and a mission was made, and we then said, okay, we need to brand it, and it was kind of, I was part of that branding exercise, and I think that the very name OpenAustria has a lot of connotation, but it also shows that the people behind this idea were aware of that openness is not only a success factor of Silicon Valley and the Bay Area, but it is also something that Austria needs. It was kind of, there was also something in this Open Austria saying, oh, Austria, you need to open up more, yeah, if you want to face the challenges of the future. So what are these challenges? I think the big challenges that Austria faces, and I think also Europe faces. I mean, I've been out here for 1.5 years here in the Silicon Valley. It's actually something we Europeans discover commonalities here, the challenges. Why we do not reproduce the same success stories as Silicon Valley does. And there are a lot of reasons, and I'm not going to explain it here at Berkeley. It's like bringing owls to Athens, as Berkeley is so much part of that success story. But in the case of Europe, there is, I would say, particularly lack of risk, of optimism in many ways, which is not entirely true for new generations. I think that there's a lot of Austrians I meet almost every day that have this Silicon Valley mindset and come here because not because they don't find that mindset in Austria, but because of the opportunities to scale their ambitions on a global scale, to scale them up, are just simply so much better. So there is an element of economic conditions in Europe in general, when it comes to risk capital, when it comes to mindset, when it comes to our education, that is overall still lacking. Clearly the situation here in the Bay Area. But it's also, I mean, these are challenges that some regions in the United States are facing as well. When we say Europe, of course Europe is not the same everywhere. There are some countries that are simply further ahead than others. If we just think of the Scandinavian countries, if we think of Switzerland, that in many ratings is even above the United States when it comes to innovation. And Austria is not bad, actually. I was just in Las Vegas at the Consumer Electronics Show, and there was a big ranking, a global ranking of innovative countries. And when it comes to, the actual digitalization issues, Austria is pretty high up. It's number 11 globally, but in terms of, I would say, mindset, in terms of regulation, there's still a lot of things we need to do. And it's also a question of, part of the problem is that our economy, the kind of success stories that we have, and Andreas mentioned them, the so-called hidden champions that are in their niches, they're not very well known, they don't have very well-known global brands, but they are market leaders on a global scale in their niches, and they often rely on business models that are very successful now and have been successful for a while, but they will probably, if they continue like that, be out of business in 5 to 10 years, given the technological change that we are facing. And they're realizing that. I mean, we're talking to them every day. They come to our office and we talk to them, and part of the challenges is how do you bring this kind of innovation culture to not just only startups. They are the least kind of problem. We also have enough startups in Europe. We have thousands of startups. So reducing innovation to startups, I don't have to explain it to you, but this is something maybe of a mistake sometimes European politician makes, but it's really about how can we transform our economies, how can we even transform our government itself, how technology is also changing the way the government works. GovTech is a big theme here in Silicon Valley. It's also increasingly becoming a big theme in Austria. We're going to organize a big conference on that theme in May in the Imperial Palace in Vienna on government technology. And I think if you look at the government program that was designed in December, one of the biggest chapters in terms of size, but also in terms of really concrete proposal, is about innovation and digitalization. So I think there you really have to look at very concrete steps that this government is now taking. I think any government would have taken those steps, because as I said, I think there is an awareness in Austria that we need to tweak and twist our story, our success story, and our regulatory system, our education system, our universities, in order to become again, and that's one of the goals explicitly stated in the government program, to become again an innovation leader. So not kind of good, but really want to be again top of the class. That's maybe not. That's maybe not something that is dominating everybody's minds, because clearly there are, with innovation and technological process, there are a lot of anxieties and fears, the future of work. Some of our current professions are going to be replaced, and on every level. Yeah, it reaches, as you know, it will reach with artificial intelligence. We know that machines can sometimes be better than medical doctors in diagnosing illnesses. So we know that there are going to be changes, and we know that they're going to affect all of us. So what is OpenAustria? OpenAustria has this mission of connecting Austria and the Bay Area in the areas of science, research, startups, big corporates, as well as arts. And this is one of the things where Austria actually also needs, with this large cultural heritage, with this so much of our GDP even depending on our cultural industries and our creative industries. One of the most exciting parts of my job is to connect to these current initiatives and bring them here to Silicon Valley. Only yesterday we were talking about a cooperation between the city of San Jose and the city of Linz, which is one of the most exciting festivals of arts and technology, the Ars Electronica, which is really known here in Silicon Valley. So there's a really cutting edge artistic and creative innovation happening in a city that not many of you know, and that's certainly not the reason why most tourists come to Austria, but it's actually a very innovative city. So those are the kind of things where we see our potential. We've grown dramatically. At first it was just me. Now we're already 7 people in a co-working space in San Francisco, really receiving almost on a weekly basis political delegations who come here and want to learn. And from big corporates and to startups, to researchers, scientists, universities, we see that we are in a process of transformation. This is true for many European countries, but I think Austria has this ambition now to really take this challenge and become again, when it comes to innovation, a leader in Austria. Where a leader on a European level. Where is this heading to? I think one of the interesting things of being a career diplomat in such an exposed situation, you have to really kind of throw some of the things you learned in your education, in your traditional diplomatic education away. You have to think of new ways of diplomacy. In fact, the Diplomatic Academy in Vienna has asked me to prepare a course on digital diplomacy, how diplomacy will be in the future. There are a lot of interesting ideas coming out of your institution, as well as Stanford University. You can think of hacking for diplomacy, how you can use design thinking, how you can use ways, this kind of spirit to go about innovation and creativity for also to the traditional field of diplomacy. So we're going to go in this direction. We're also going to become, and that's our ambition, to become something like a think tank of the future for our governments and for our societies, which is a very interesting and very privileged position. And I would like to invite you if you have a connection to Austria, to also engage with us. We have quite a few public events. The next one is on March 7th in San Francisco, where we talk about creative tech coming out of Austria, kind of a sneak preview into what Austria is going to do at South by Southwest in Austin, Texas. So you can see that there are some of these traditions that go back centuries, but Austria knows that we need to adapt and change. We will not continue to be successful if we rely on what has made us strong and good. And that is a little bit the message, I think, of the institution that we are developing here in San Francisco, and maybe also a bit of the positive note of where Austria is going. Clearly, there are challenges and there are concerns that Austrians have, that people have, that are looking at Austria, but I think overall there's also a lot of opportunity in what is happening.